Welcome to the Transformative Pursuit with Dr. Christopher Cohn. We're glad you have joined us and pray the content will be helpful and encouraging. The pursuit starts now.
Hello and welcome to the Transformative Pursuit. This is Season 2, Episode 6. We are asking the question, how do we know God exists? And this is part 4 of our discussion as we near the end of our consideration of how do we know that God exists. Well, we've talked a lot about his fingerprints. We've talked about some biblical evidences and data for the existence of God. And we've got a bit more to throw on that pile today. Well, today, the Transformative Pursuit is brought to you by Agathon University of Applied Faith. Grow in the biblical worldview, become a better transformative educator and leader, learn fully online and at your own pace, learn starting at $78 per credit hour, whether you want to enhance your growth through a degree program, earn a certification to enhance your service and leadership skills, or simply take classes for personal enrichment. Agathon University has an educational path that fits you. And they have recently announced the Agathon Church Partnership Programs, which allow everyone in your local church to have Versity TV access and access to tuition scholarships. Check those out at agathonu.com. agathonu.com. And of course, this season, we want Season 2 to be about your questions as we are answering listeners' questions about the existence of God. And it is a long answer, I admit. But we look forward to your questions. Send them to me directly at ccone@drcone.com, ccone at drcone.com, with subject line TTP question, so I'll know you want it discussed on the show. Also on X at Dr. Cohn, DRCONE. Well, we've been asking the question, how do we know God exists, right? We've talked about the transcendental idea, Proverbs 1:7 and 2:6. His existence transcends proof. It is just a fact. We argue or reason from God, not to God. The fingerprints of God, Romans 1:18 through 20. We see order, design, purpose, his attributes and divine power and his character demonstrated clearly through what's been seen. We see the evidence of Scripture, the reliability, the trustworthiness, the cogency of, the fulfillment of prophecy, the historical miracles and testimony. All those three really go together. And then the resurrection of Jesus Christ affirmed in 1 Corinthians 15:14 through 20 as central to the Christian faith. So these are some biblical platforms from which we can discuss the existence of God, remembering that the Bible never defends the existence of God. It presupposes, it assumes it as a transcendental reality, meaning it transcends provability and the need for proof, much like the existence of us. We also are in that category. The existence of reality, the world around us, that is also in that category. It's just like we reason from these things. We know them to be self-evident. Well, we talked also last episode about 1 Peter 3:15 and why it's relevant to be able to communicate the existence of God to someone who maybe doesn't have that same understanding. And we see, for example, in this passage, we're reminded, 1 Peter 3:15, we're reminded to set apart Christ as Lord in our hearts, always ready to make a defense to everyone who asks us to give an account for the hope that is within us, yet with gentleness and reverence. And so the idea is to be always prepared to give that account. So are you? Are we? Are we ready at a moment's notice when someone says, hey, how come you have joy? Hey, how come you are able to hold up under difficulty and trial? Why do you believe in all this Jesus mumbo jumbo? What's that all about? Well, you'll be able to address it biblically. Now, there are extra biblical arguments and models, and they have some value, but mostly you'll find people bringing up these models in order to critique and argue against the existence of God. So it's helpful to know a little bit about some of these models so that we can understand their limitations and maybe how they're helpful. So one of those is Aquinas' 5 ways. This is Thomas Aquinas, and he has 5 ways that he argues that God exists. In fact, he says we know God exists because of these 5 things. So let's just walk through these and think about them, and let's see, is there anything here we can use? Does this align with Scripture, or is it totally not worthwhile? Well, Aquinas' first way is the argument from change. He argues that because there is change and movement, there must be a first mover. And he determines that first mover who has the ability to cause all this change, that is God. Okay, so it's a very good point. It's kind of a cause and effect argument, that because we see these effects, we look for the cause. But what do you think the argument against that argument is? Well, if you must have a cause to every effect, then you must have a cause for God as well, arguing there that he is an effect. He may be this absolutely wonderful effect, but he's still an effect, and therefore there must be a cause. And it creates a problem called infinite regress, where you just keep looking for that ultimate first cause or first mover. So Aquinas, though, argues that God is the first mover, that he's the one that began the movement and caused change to begin with. So he would argue against the infinite regress idea, and those who critique his 5 ways will argue that his argument is defeated by infinite regress, that the first mover there is no first mover, there's always a cause that caused that effect. Again, we go back biblically and we see this transcendental idea that the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, wisdom, and understanding. We see Genesis 1:1, in the beginning God, right? So remember, we're not arguing, biblically speaking, we're not arguing to the existence of God, we're arguing from the existence of God. And Aquinas is arguing to the existence of God, but saying that it is built into nature, that this concept of cause and effect, specifically movement and first mover. Okay, Aquinas' second argument is very similar. He argues from causality, that because there are effects, there must be causes. You see, it's very, very similar. Really, the first 3 are very similar to each other. But the idea is that because there are effects, there must be causes of those effects. And in order for anything to actually be caused, there must be an uncaused cause. Something that has not been caused by cause and effect, that is causing the effect of everything else. Well, that's interesting. And you can see how built into that argument is a defense against that kind of that regress that just keeps on going. And of course, we certainly see that these things align with Scripture in the sense that that God is the first mover. Genesis says, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. He's the one that set all this in motion. And even more so, he did it, right? We see how he did it in chapter 1. He didn't just set it in motion and leave it, as deism would suggest, but he's actually very active and involved in his creation, both the act and the maintenance. And so causality is this idea that he is the uncaused cause, is a biblical concept. It aligns with that. But remember how Aquinas is using these arguments. He's using them to argue to God, reasoning to God. And essentially, the problem that Aquinas will end up with is he kind of eliminates the need for special revelation, because the natural world is just so well designed that you don't need God to speak to you because nature speaks to you. It's a little bit problematic. He undermines that a little bit. And so his argument is, while it's sound in the sense that it works, it is arguing to God rather than from God. And that assumes arguing independent of God's existence in order to arrive at his existence, which directly contradicts what Solomon says in Proverbs 1:7, fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. So problematic, right? How about the third of his 5 ways? Necessity. Now, this is an interesting thing. The argument from necessity is essentially that there are some things that are necessary and other things that are contingent. Not everything is necessary, right? In other words, at any given time, something can exist or not exist, right? But what he says is, because things exist, there must be something, some being that's necessary, that must exist, that's not contingent, because if everything was contingent and you had enough time, then nothing would exist, because everything that wasn't necessary would at one point in time not exist. Okay, hopefully this isn't confusing to you, but it's really interesting seeing this argument from necessity. His argument here is that God is that necessary being who ensures that what exists, exists. And again, it lines up with Scripture in the sense that we see God as the creator, and we see that emphasized and echoed in John chapter 1, right? That Jesus is, that the Father created through him. He's the Word. And all things came into being through him. But again, what's Aquinas' Achilles heel here? He's arguing to God rather than arguing from the existence of God. Then the fourth way is an argument from perfection. That because you have good, better, and best, you have gradation, right? Good, better, and best. You have to have the best. The best has to actually exist. Well, who is the best? What is the best? It's God. He's the perfect being, to which all goods will point. So, interesting argument. Makes perfect sense that that if you have good, better, and best, a best that exists is better than a best that doesn't exist, right? So the best would have to exist. By the way, that's similar to what Anselm will talk about when we will consider his ontological argument. So the argument for perfection. And this one is really intriguing, because when you think about ethics and axiology as a foundation, axiology is the study of what is good, and ethics is what your responsibility is in keeping with what is good. Okay, so axiology leads to ethics. Well, how do you know what good is? Where do we get our definition of good? Well, in Aquinas' argument here, God is perfection, and so the goods will essentially point to him. And so our definition of good will come from God. Not terribly far off. It's an intriguing concept. I would say God is the ultimate definer of good, and he tells us what is good, as he has said. Then the fifth way is the argument from design. This is the teleological argument, the argument from design or the designer. The idea is if you have a design, you have to have a designer. And of course, there's the watch argument that people often refer to. If you see a watch, you're in a forest and you see a watch, a functioning watch there, you think of the designer. Someone made that watch. It didn't just randomly appear, right? There's design. Well, you still can have the infinite regress problem that if the design is so great that it had a designer, well, the designer also has a design, and so who's the designer of the designer? But again, Aquinas is arguing that it's the designer who came up with the design, and he's the first designer. He is the designer of all that is. There's no one who designed him, which is he's the personal designer. So I appreciate that and value that, but again, it can be defeated by the infinite regress approach. So what I would suggest is, rather than utilizing the extra biblical arguments to defend the hope that is within you, be ready to make that defense by sanctifying or setting apart Christ as Lord in your heart. We see in Colossians chapter 3, 16, 17, for example, that the word of Christ should dwell richly in our hearts. And I think that's part of what Peter's message there is. That's how we would set him apart as Lord in our hearts. We would value what he values and put in our hearts and minds what he wants to be there. So think about hiding his word in your heart that you might not sin against him, but also hiding your word in his heart that you might be able to not only walk in it, but represent it to others, and in particular, those who have questions or are struggling with these issues. The extra biblical models have some value to them, but they aren't going to help somebody to come to the knowledge of Christ. So be careful, don't rely too heavily on them, but be able to respond to the infinite regress issue. Go straight to Scripture and you won't even have to worry about it. Well, we've got a little more to talk about on the subject of how do we know God exists. We'll do one more episode and consider Anselm. In the meantime, enjoy the transformative pursuit and your walk through Scripture. God bless.